Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January webinar presented by the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. My name is Janie Kreco, and I'm the Training and Support Specialist at the RTSC. My colleague today is Julie Sinclair, and she is the Director of Special Education Projects at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. Our technical producer today is Emily Gaudet. If you're interested in learning more about the Federation, please go to our website at fcsm.org and explore all the different programs and training opportunities. Our webinar today, Writing Social Emotional Goals to Reach Best Outcomes, is being recorded and will be available on the Federation's YouTube channel. And that channel is youtube.com/FCSN videos. If you are hearing the webinar, please type your questions into the toolbox, and we will answer them as time allows. Thank you. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you.
And I will begin the presentation.
So the discussion today will include a brief introduction, if people are not familiar with it, to the Massachusetts Social and Emotional Learning Curriculum, also known as the SEL curricula. We'll talk a little bit about the Massachusetts Behavioral Health and Public Schools Framework, which is actually a work in progress, I believe, is what we're calling it. Is that true?
Kind of. We'll explain it. The Massachusetts Comprehensive Health Curriculum Framework and the PLEP B. We'll do a brief presentation of that so that you can kind of see the thread going through this. And then we're going to kind of walk you through writing measurable social emotional goals, which honestly are not easy. So we have given some tips through the presentation about how to best approach writing social emotional goals. So the SEL curriculum, or the Social Emotional Learning Curricula, came about as a result of the anti-bullying legislation that was approved in May 2010. And it mandated the creation of guidelines for SEL learning curricula. They were published by the Department of Early and Secondary Education in June 2011. I don't think they're widely circulated. I'm sure if there are teachers or administrators out there, you guys know about them. Parents might not necessarily know about them. But they're brief and they're to the point, and they kind of give you the areas that you might be useful to you when writing social emotional goals. So these are some of the learning skills that they talk about in the SEL curricula. A lot of these are semi-clinical terms, although they're pretty self-explanatory, and you can see them. We can walk through them. Self-awareness, and this is across the ages, by the way. Developmentally, they have different things that you should be doing at different ages or different stages of education, but this is across all of the age groups. Self-awareness is recognizing emotional reactions, making sure that you're perceiving what's happening around you appropriately, and the ability to complete tasks and reach goals. Sometimes not so easy for some of the kids that we deal with. Self-management, impulse control, very, very important. Self-motivation, organization, social awareness, empathy, respect, taking others' perspective, and this goes to the fact that you can teach these skills. A lot of times people thought that they were not teachable, that kids were just born with the ability to be empathic, but they're learning that that's not true. Relationship skills, all important for kids with social emotional learning difficulties, especially kids on the spectrum, but for any kid who may have some trauma in their background. Negotiation and refusal. I love that. The ability to say no and not just go along with the crowd, and the ability to ask for help. Responsible decision making. This, of course, can be taught from the very beginning, but it becomes more important as the kids get into high school. That's analyzing problems and
solving the problems. And then the epitome of it all, which is ethical responsibility. I love that. That's not my term. That's actually in the curricula. Ethical responsibility. When we start to talk about writing the goals, you will see how we use those areas to kind of help you to decide where on the how to write the goal, and we'll show you very specifically where that might go on the goal writing. So we're going to talk a little tiny bit about the Behavioral Health in Public Schools framework. So just so you know, someone's giving me notes here, so thank you, Paige, so that everybody understands what I'm talking about. Sometimes I write things that I understand that maybe other people don't. So the framework that we're talking about, firstly, is was designed by a task force in August 2011. And it was in order for the schools to increase their capacity to collaborate with behavioral health providers, and that's important, that's in the community, but also to provide supportive school environments, safe and supportive schools. And the task force also created an assessment tool, which is available, but I'm not sure that too many schools are using that yet. And what we mean by a work in progress is that the implementation of this framework, the Behavioral Health and Public Schools framework, is being rolled out. And I believe the last date for the rollout to be complete is 2017, right? And I'm not sure what part of this is. It's a very long document, by the way. It's 175 pages long. But part of it is the truancy part. Is not rolling out until 2017. Yeah, I think that's the part of it. They really address truancy in it because that's one of the truancy, school refusal, all kind of the same thing, and it all does have an impact on kids with social emotional disabilities. So this framework that we're talking about right now is quite long. It includes academic and non-academic supports as being a very important part of the whole approach to behavioral health in the public schools. It emphasizes collaboration with families, which of course is all important for kids with social emotional disabilities because you have school, you have the community, you have home, and they all should be fluid and everybody collaborating for the best outcomes. And then we also have the Massachusetts Comprehensive Health Curriculum Framework. I really did need some advice about what all these things mean: frameworks, curriculum, strands, standards. And thank goodness people here at the Federation have a really good feeling about all of this, and it was explained to me this morning. But this particular Comprehensive Health Curriculum Framework was written in October 1999, which is so last century, and actually does not, it was way prior to the anti-bullying laws and all of the up-to-date information we have now about kids on the spectrum and kids with complex trauma. But the learning standards does include some very good things to be looking at for writing social emotional goals. It identifies and accommodates feelings and emotions. That's one of the areas. To identify and accommodate intense positive and negative feelings, which I think is a great thing to identify. Self-concept and self-esteem. A lot of this will overlap with the SEL curricula, kind of put into different words. Decision-making, positive techniques for handling difficult decisions. There's a little one with doing yoga on the picture, and that's actually a very 21st century thing on how to apply mental health learning standards. It's one of the most wonderful ways, I think, to achieve a lot of the mental health learning standards. So I duplicated that slide again. I am very sorry. Yeah, it doesn't matter. The other one didn't have a picture on it, though. That's probably why I duplicated it. I apologize. All right, so we have our frameworks, we have our learning strands, we have our curricula. So those are our guides to thinking about building a successful IEP for students with social emotional disabilities. I call them social emotional disabilities, but probably all of you know out there that the area of criteria on the IEPs only says emotional disabilities, right?
Correct.
That changes. It used to be severe emotional disabilities, SEDs, and I think probably whenever the new IEP forms come out, which I understand are in the works, it'll probably say social emotional disabilities.
Correct.
Because it does take in far more than the SEDs, which used to be the kids with the most challenges.
Correct.
So we're kind of broadening that whole criteria, which is a great thing. So if we do this logically, we've got our frameworks, we've got our parts of the IEP to do current levels of performance, and that is the PLEP. We have PLEP A, which of course is the academic piece of it, and PLEP B, which is right on the other side of it, which are other educational needs. And I always suggest to my clients, the special education surrogate parents, that they use PLEP B to identify the social emotional needs. And they have a nice little checklist right on the IEP form, and I think my next slide talks about that. Yep. So the areas that you can use as a checklist are here: the extracurricular activities, curricula activities, and that would be, I believe it means any kind of sports activity, before school stuff, anything that's done at the school or during school time. Social emotional needs is one of the categories. Communication, and that doesn't mean for the deaf or hard of hearing. That is just the process of communicating with peers.
Right.
Behavior, which to me is kind of the same thing as social emotional needs, but I'm not sure how they differ.
Could be sensory needs. A child could have sensory needs and be overwhelmed and therefore act out just trying to get that sensory need met. So, so there's other things that come into play here.
Okay, and from my perspective, of course, behavior is always the kids that are getting suspended.
Correct.
So,
right.
And again, I think any of these would be useful and appropriate to use on a goal. Non-academic activities, I always think of those in terms of recess, gym, anything during the school day, during those particular 6 to 8 hours, which are a non-academic in focus, but that kids with SEL needs have a hard time with. And then also on this, on PLEP B, are transitional skills. I don't know, if I were writing an IEP, I'd probably put that all separate, but they do put it on PLEP B. It kind of minimizes the utility and the usefulness and the importance of transitional skills, which is a whole another webinar, in fact, several webinars. So I just want to let everybody know that complex trauma, which is, of course, my specialty, or other social emotional disabilities, and we're talking now mostly about kids on the spectrum, and Julie, if you can think of any other kids that might be in a population that would use this non-academic PLEP B, just pipe up.
Right.
But the ones that we are most concerned about are those hidden disabilities or the invisible disabilities that used to be considered kids that were very challenging, difficult to teach, difficult to keep in a classroom. And both of those two populations, the kids with trauma and the kids on the spectrum, have a lot in common as far as behaviors, difficult behaviors, and a different way of learning.
Right.
And both of those populations, of course, again, can have needs in all of those areas in the first bullet. So what is the utility of PLEP B? And again, those of you out there who are educators know all this. We do have a very mixed audience today, so I'm going to back up a little bit and hope that it's not too terribly boring for most people. So the PLEP B can describe baseline performances of skills, including the social, emotional, or behavioral skills that the child needs to acquire, as described in their evaluations and assessments. So you always use those assessments as the baseline from which you want to move and hopefully make some progress in these particular areas of need. And it also allows the team members to see the discrepancy between where a student is and where a student should be, according to especially normative assessments where they're based on their peers, typical peers, and also based on their age. So that a lot of discrepancies will appear in those assessments for kids with SEL needs.
So we also find that kids that have developmental delay are also delayed in their emotional response. So kids that don't interpret the world always the way that it's presented could also have that. So a child with an intellectual disability or a child with a developmental delay will also be delayed in those social emotional areas. And I think sometimes that gets forgotten and people think, well, they're 10 and they should act like 10. But the truth of the matter is they're not maybe cognitively 10 and not able to. And I think sometimes that gets missed.
And while we're in PLEP B, I just want to point out a lot of people always felt that PLEP B was just for related services.
Right.
Related services meaning occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language. But that is not true.
Right.
PLEP B can be used throughout the day and throughout the curriculum. So it's a different way of looking at PLEP B. It's actually a very valuable way to achieve goals.
Yes, I have a couple questions about PLEP B that came in.
Okay, good.
Does PLEP B cover medical needs and accommodations as well?
Good question, Julie. Do you know the answer?
I wish I had my form with me. I could answer that.
Not one of the criteria.
Right. And on PLEP A, we find that's where the accommodations are listed out for learning. Sometimes I'm sorry, I'm blanking on what we find in PLEP B, but it could certainly have accommodations on PLEP B, so that's being able to provide the support and services the child needs in order to access.
I know assistive technology is one of the places on PLEP B, so I'm thinking that's probably medical needs also.
They have
other.
One of
the
categories is other.
Other, yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure
Anything that's it's not an inclusive list.
Right.
Great. We actually had someone suggest other.
Yeah.
Also, another question, what is the true definition of extracurricular activities? What's actually approved for the IEP? Could you provide some examples?
I've had this discussion a lot, and what there is a legal definition. Okay, so Paige is saying there is a legal definition. None of us
we don't have
it
that
at our fingertips here.
But I know that a lot of these categories are suggestive. There's suggestive types of categories. And they always say, I know in the IEP process guide it says, but not exclusive, not inclusive. And essentially it's set up to be for any non-academic need that the team feels is necessary for the child to move forward on. So extracurricular versus non-academic activities is always a question.
Right. And that's something the team can problem solve by themselves, but extracurricular we think of sometimes as after school or before school. It could be in high school, it could be clubs. But it means that everybody's to have access to that. Whereas the non-academic one it could be like computer or art or music or something like that. So it's like one of those electives, not necessarily core curriculum.
Specials.
Correct.
Specials.
Yes, and of course they really, the federal government,
I believe, also the state has
strengthened that whole area for kids with disabilities
in the extracurricular area.
Right.
Civil rights was
Correct.
because they weren't being allowed to play with typical kids in school.
Right. So the way to get that is to make sure that it's a goal in the IEP. You know, so and so will attend the dances with support, or so and so will attend the prom, or whatever it is. But if you have a goal in the IEP, then what happens if it says the student needs additional support to make good choices, say, then the school knows that they need to advertise for that and find someone to fill that role.
Right. And it's written in no uncertain terms now with the new laws. All right. So as are we all set, Emily? Okay. So just so that you, I'm just going down the actual PLEP B form. It's not in front of me. I've kind of memorized it, but there's an area on PLEP B that talks about the accommodation for the general education environment. And I have a lot of questions about that from parents and teachers or not teachers, parents and SESPs who say schools say that the accommodations are made so it doesn't need to be written in as a goal. And that is an ongoing discussion. But it does allow also for, that's in the general education environment. PLEP B also has an area for specially designed instruction, which is the content modification and teaching delivery, etc. I think it's also how you gauge performance for certain curricula or across curriculum. So right here, that's great because it says specifically that PLEP B can be used for non-academic issues. And even though there are, this is a question that comes up a lot, what if there are no academic needs, they're all non-academic, can we write goals? Yes, you can. And it's pretty specific here at PLEP B. Anything to add to that?
So the only other thing that I want to add regarding PLEP B is oftentimes we're seeing that parents don't have access to PLEP B, so they may not see it ahead of time and be ready to ask some pointed questions. The other thing that's happening is some school districts are, maybe we are not offering PLEP B at all, so some of the IEPs are coming through with no PLEP B as an option at all. So we encourage parents to be sure and be looking and make sure that you have PLEP A and PLEP B covered in your IEP.
And I think that whole lack of PLEP B input comes from the related service piece that was around before all the new research decided that this was absolutely important for kids in school. So, you know, if you have a team that's saying no, there's no related service, then you can say yes, yes, yes. We have these curriculums now that specifically state that it's okay to have these goals.
Correct.
Academic ones.
Yeah.
Okay. So IEP, here we're going to start with our little tips here, and I hope you find them useful. I think, and a lot of these are my own opinions, so don't blame Julie for this. She did not write this part, but I did, and I thought it was pretty good. The IEP should be written with a direct connection between PLEP B and measurable annual goals. So I always call it the golden thread, which people think is weird, but that's what I call it. So you use the same language in the specific goal focus, which is what they call it in the actual goal writing part of the IEP. Just as if, take it right out of PLEP B and take it right out of the curricula that I referred to in the beginning. Those are all online, by the way, and I will send, just so you know, I was kind of rushed for this because of our snow day yesterday, so I did not include in this PowerPoint the references that you're going to need to look up these curricula and stuff. I will send it out with our PowerPoint this afternoon, so not to worry about that. So, for example, on the IEP form itself, you could say, goal number 1, the form says goal, you put in number 1. And then the form says special goal focus, and you put in, or whomever's writing the IEP, social emotional needs. And then that's the part from PLEP B. And then you put in the part of the curricula that you are addressing. And in this case, it's self-management from the SEL curriculum.
So
Awesome.
where you will find your goal focus is in those assessments and evaluations which identify the learning need for the student. And that's the important thing, because if it's not backed up in those assessments and evaluations, then you're kind of on sinking sand.
That's
so
right.
It's going to be an important thing to make sure that the assessments and evaluations give you the information that you need, and that's why it's a great idea to always meet with the people before they evaluate your child or your student, so that you are able to give input into what kind of information you're looking for.
Right. And that current level of performance, which is what we're talking about for assessments, is actually a part of PLEP B. It's one of the most important parts of PLEP B. It's that baseline performance that comes from the evaluations, and that's where the team determines that there are some needs that need to be met there.
Right.
Through the IEP.
Right.
All right, so writing the measurable social emotional goals. Here's where we really get down to the nitty-gritty. People are afraid, I think, a little bit of social emotional goal writing, and I think that's part of the reason why PLEP B is kind of shoved aside a little bit, because some people would call them clinical. And if you read the SEL curriculum, and certainly behavioral health frameworks or strands or whatever, they have a very clinical bias to them. So don't be afraid. There are a lot of people out there that can help you, and especially in the school. And this is addressed in those curricula, by the way. So the first thing you need to do, though, when you're writing a goal is to specifically identify the behavior that you're going to be addressing in the goal. It has to be very specific, and you'll see that in the goals that we've written. A lot of people do it through functional behavioral assessments if it's a real challenging behavior, or it's just kind of picked out of the assessments and evaluations as to an area of need. You really need to understand the problem before writing the goal, and that's where people say, I'm not a clinician, I can't do that. But you can. There are people out there to help. And we've got a whole the World Wide Webs, that's what our politician used to call them, are out there to kind of do your research on it. And it's a wonderful tool. But the first place you should probably be going, once you get kind of a handle yourself on the problem and why the problem might be occurring, is to consult with the in-school behavioral health personnel. And it's strongly advised in the mental health curriculum that these people get more involved in the IEP writing goals. And community partners, they talk a lot about the Child Behavioral Health Initiative in that mental health curriculum, the new one, about how these people can come into the school, the CBHI people, the Child Behavioral Health Initiative, the liaisons that can come in and help the teams to write the goals. They are clinicians at various levels, going up from, I think you can be, don't quote me on this, but I think you can be an associate's degree and be a family partner, all the way up to master's level people who are actual clinicians. So get their help. You're not out there alone. And then, of course, we talked about the research on your own. And the reason I suggest that is because back in the day, when I first started teaching, and probably Julie, you also, there was always, oh, they're just looking for attention. They're looking for negative attention, or they're being manipulative. That's part of it, maybe, but it's certainly not at the base of why these behaviors are happening. It's
Correct.
Much more complex and complicated than that, and not as easily labeled as that.
Right.
In fact, we shouldn't be using those labels at this point.
Right.
Where neuroscience is at this point.
Right.
So we're going to start now kind of going through some social emotional goals. We have a whole bunch of these. I think I only used 3 or 4 here in this webinar because of time constraints, but we can certainly send them out if you haven't already gotten them. So maybe I'll just send it out along with the PowerPoint and the references. Okay, so let's talk about the first case study. And these are put together actually as for Julie's seminar during our conference back in October, and Paige was a big part of that also. So this case study is very short. It's during recess. 5-year-old Maria cries when friends do not want to play with her. The other kids become frustrated with Maria because she is not flexible. She only wants to do what she wants to do. So the area of need on PLEP B would be non-academic activity. I chose that because it was recess. Could be the misuse of non-academic activity, but I couldn't think of a better one than recess or gym or whatever where these kids have such issues.
Nope, perfect.
And then what I would do if I were in charge of writing the goal or just interested in making sure my input was put into the goal writing, I would research why is recess so hard for kids with social and emotional difficulties. When I did research that, about 9 million responses came up, but obviously I think all of us know how to kind of parse through those. But familiarize yourself with the issues, and the cutting edge, the newest research is probably the best, of course. And then you consult with the nurse, the adjustment counselor, the school psychologist for their expertise. Sometimes nurses are overlooked a lot in team meetings, but they have an awful lot of knowledge. And when I was working with the Child Behavioral Health Initiative at IEP meetings, I would invite the nurse to be there because they're also safe people that the kids like to be mentored by. So here's what we came up with for an example of based on that case study. And this is how the IEP form would look. Goal number 1, specific goal focus, non-academic activity, and the place in the curricula that is actually directly written down in the SEL curriculum is relationship skills. That's definitely what Maria needs help with. And the annual goal is during recess, Maria will listen to the opinions of her peers 4 out of 5 times as monitored by her teacher. That could be monitored by various people, but because she's 5, I figure she's in kindergarten. I know when I was teaching kindergarten, I was out on the recess.
Me too. Me too.
Freezing cold because it was
right.
It was snowy, and if it wasn't below 22 or something, we all went out. So recess would last an hour and a half with all the clothes coming off and clothes going on and everything else. But I diverge. And here is the, we like benchmarks. I like benchmarks. I think you do too.
I love benchmarks.
Yeah. I find objectives a little difficult, and that's even coming from a clinical background. They're not easy for me to read, and I don't know if they're easy for anybody to read. So we like benchmarks. So first marking period, Maria will work with an adjustment counselor. There's your in-school person to identify and discuss behavior that causes other students to become angry. And then during the second marking period, she will begin to listen to the opinions of her friends or her peers 3 out of 5 times as monitored by the teacher. And then by the end of the academic year, she'll listen to the opinions of other students without interrupting 4 out of 5 times. So Maria's not going to be the best listener by the end of the year, but she might hopefully be better than she was at the beginning of the year. And she's only 5. She's got a long ways to go. But if she doesn't learn it as early as possible, it becomes more difficult to teach.
Right.
I think we all understand
Right,
that.
right.
Second case study. 13-year-old Joe, when he's presented with challenging material, and anything could be challenging, or all things could be challenging, he becomes aggressive and often starts a fight with one of his classmates. We've all probably seen that, especially with kids both on the spectrum and with complex trauma issues. People are going to say, well, that's a real tough goal, and it is. These are not easy. But let's go through our little tip guide here. The area of need is behavior. Why do kids who become frustrated in school start fights? And the consult. This is out there. When you research it, you have to be interested in it. Some of it is academic, not academic, scholarly. But if you parse through it, you will find that most clinicians and neuroscientists agree that the pressure to perform, and certainly a school is a place where you're always asked to perform in front of your peers and in front of authority figures, your brain becomes overwhelmed
and it can revert to a flee, fight, freeze response, which is usually a pretty negative response. It's not a positive response, it's very primitive. But you do end up starting fights and becoming aggressive.
All right, so how are we going to resolve that? One of the things that clinicians really like, and again this comes from that consult, is they really like those self-monitoring tools, especially as the kid is older. And 3 questions seem to be best practice these days. So we're going to teach Joe. Great picture Emily found for me this morning. Doesn't he look like he needs help? That he's going to use this tool and have it monitored by his teacher. Using a self-monitoring tool is a great way to teach. Kids feel involved. They may even be involved in writing the tool with the adjustment counselor or the teacher. So he becomes kind of engaged with it and kind of owns it.
So I think another skill that happens, and you don't even, it's not intentional maybe, but it also helps students or children be able to cross all environments. So when feeling pressure, feeling frustrated at school, this is what you do. But to learn that that strategy can also be implemented in different environments within the community, like learning how to walk away. And so that's really like a life skill here that you're teaching, because when you can generalize information from one environment to another across all environments, that's really where you have great success.
Exactly. And hopefully he will, by using this over and over again throughout the year, it will kind of hardwire itself.
Correct.
And self-efficacy, by the way, it's a big word, but it is in the actual curricula. It's that sense of self that a kid needs to have, and a lot of kids don't have that when they have some issues in their background.
Right.
And here's the benchmarks. Again, the adjustment counselor will be someone who will help him identify the emotions, and then he'll go into using his 3-question self-monitoring tool. The second period, he will be prompted to use the tool at least 3 times a week, and then by the end of the academic year, he will use his 3-question monitoring tool, hopefully without being prompted. Again, whether he can achieve that, we will see. If not, during the year, if it's obviously not working, we all know you can go back to the drawing board and try another technique or a different benchmark.
Right.
Yes,
Emily. Yes, we have someone asking, my school has told me that I'm writing a curriculum and not goals. For example, the 3-question approach seems like something they would take issue with.
Writing a curriculum.
Well, if you're writing part of an IEP, it's the goal, and the goal has those 3 areas: the target behavior, the condition, and the criteria. You shouldn't be writing curricula for the student. It should be skill-based, based on the needs of the child identified in the assessment or evaluation.
I don't know as whether or not they're thinking that the adjustment counselor would be writing. Are they referring to the monitoring?
I believe so.
I mean, self-monitoring tool?
We've actually had someone else answer that
Okay,
question and say,
that's great about webinars.
they've said we need to determine if the performance is related to a skill deficit or a performance deficit,
Correct.
i.e. does he have the skill set to meet this specific task?
Correct.
Yeah.
Again, these are not easy things,
and it needs a team to really work up these really good goals. And again, there are some guidelines now out there. It's not made up. It's in the guidelines. Yeah.
There's a question there. Do you have information regarding where to obtain or how to make self-monitoring forms? Do those exist?
Oh, they
exist.
Yes,
they're definitely out there. Again, if you do your research, a lot of them will go up, come up, and you can bring them in and show the team and say, do you think this would be a good tool to use for Joey or whoever this kid is? And do you think he's capable of using this tool, and whether or not it will be effective for him?
one more.
Make a decision for the team. Yep.
Okay. Can you address the supporting grid services for examples like this? For example, with Maria, she gets time with a counselor in the first marking period, but what about the later terms?
Right.
Ooh,
Oh, you mean as far as how do you put that on the
Service delivery
grid? How would you, Julie?
Well, I think that you would have to just assess the need and know that you can always go back to the service delivery grid, and like every quarter if you want, and know that an IEP can be amended at any time. So I think that's really where it plays in. But if a school system wants to be planning, they may think that time would be reduced as the year goes on, and they could plug it in that way. And if the student needed more, they could change the service delivery grid. So I think that's not always an easy question because you're not exactly sure how the child's going to be able to respond to this kind of goal.
And these are goals that are they're not like academic goals where you have very good assessment tools to see what progress is being made.
Correct.
So a lot of it will be just in the doing of it, and to see to measure the change, which a lot of it's going to be observational.
Right.
Which is okay.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe not as good as what people would expect with the academic assessments kind of thing.
Yes.
Sorry, we've had one more good one. Can a child be disciplined for not meeting these goals? For example, taking away recess for disciplinary actions, or not meeting the social goals on an IEP. She mentions charter schools might.
That's a great question. And here what we're doing is we're coming up against code of conduct versus IEP goals. And I think a lot of you know about Chapter 222, which is coming out next year. But certainly right now, kids on IEPs, the code of conducts are written specifically for the general population.
It's written for everyone. The thing that you can put in your IEP is a waiver.
That's right.
That the child is not able to understand or be able to meet the definition of the code of conduct, and so they would have a waiver on that piece of it.
Yeah, and those codes of conduct hopefully will be changing dramatically over the next few years. Towards safe and supportive schools. That is a paradigm shift. And certainly President Obama came out in favor of it last week or the week before. The Office of Civil Rights is really behind a lot of it because it's the codes of conduct have ended up in the past expelling or suspending kids with disabilities at far greater rate.
Right. And also IDEA protects children on an IEP, so there's that other little piece.
Yes, exactly.
So I would say that no, a school does not have the right to do that
if it's on an IEP.
I think we touched a nerve there because we've gotten a few people mentioning charter schools specifically.
Okay. Yeah. And charter schools are under a lot of scrutiny right now, just so everyone knows. I did go to a hearing a few months ago up at DESE. There's not a lot of people are disappointed in charter schools, and so I think we're probably going to see some changes there also. Okay. All right. So how are we doing for time?
1:14.
Okay.
So if you have questions, throw them in because
we have a couple more case studies, and I do want to hear the questions so that we can answer them. So this case study is poor little 10-year-old Janie, that's me, tries to cut in line, which can upset other students and cause conflicts. 10-year-olds, that's usually a preschool or kindergarten type of thing, although 10-year-olds can do it too. So it's not easy. Again, these behaviors are very annoying. So let's see how we decided we were going to handle that. Area of needs, both social and emotional needs. What are you going to look up? Why do some children have trouble staying in line? When I researched this, I had to do my own research to make sure I wasn't crazy. It came up with all kinds of funny things until I actually put the words in right, and then boom, all these things came up. And the consults came out of the research I did, and it's very interesting. I loved it. They said some kids can have attentional systems that don't function the same as others. So they're
highly distracted by the process rather than the outcome. I loved that.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. You know, that makes perfect sense. It's cutting edge. It talks about neurology and gets to the understanding the problem so you can come to the solution of it. So it's goal number 3, the focus is non-academic activities. The skill area is self-awareness. And by the end of the academic year, she'll line up appropriately 5 out of 5 times. Ooh, we were tough on her, as monitored by the lunch and bus monitors. 10-year-olds, what, 3rd grade, 4th grade?
Mm-hmm.
5th grade? 5th grade?
Right.
Oh, poor kids. They usually, they could be in middle school by then. They don't have teachers that are hanging around by them, so they're going to have monitors. And monitors, now here's a question I have for you, Julie.
Okay.
Can monitors be on the service grid?
Yes.
Okay, good. That was the right answer then. So they may have some specific chores for kids on IEPs, and in this case it would be to appropriately and discreetly help Jane with her lining up. And let's look at the benchmarks here. So they're going to give visual cues and coaching, and she's going to line up 3 out of 5 times, 4 out of 5 times, and then 5 out of 5 times. And I think that's actually achievable if you're 10. And notice there's no discipline here, there's no consequences, there's cueing, there's positive skill building rather than consequences, and certainly not any kind of negative discipline. That's part of the paradigm shift, people. So we all have to get behind it. All right, now this is one of the saddest cases, and I've had a lot of kids come up with these things. And they're a little, a lot of people don't understand them. I'm not sure any of us understand them completely, but kids like to do this. 6-year-old Alex hides things in his backpack. And notice we haven't labeled this as lying and stealing. Someone pointed that, the clinician here said, don't call it lying and stealing, but that's what it looks like. So he'll put food, items, school supplies, other kids' stuff. No question about it, he claims that they are his items. Area of need, social emotional needs. That's probably a thing that he does everywhere he goes, in the community, at school, in the residence, wherever he is. So what does a 60-year-old really know about stealing and lying? And you'd be surprised when you do the research is that they don't know a whole bunch about it. They don't even have those labels in their head yet.
Right.
So the consult would say that the kid has poor problem-solving skills that can lead to wanting something but not knowing how to get it, and then staying out of trouble when the stealing, in quotes, is discovered. So obviously, little whoever this is needs to be taught some good problem-solving skills. I think that it's far more complex than that. There is a hoarding thing that some kids do when they've been abused and neglected. But it's problem-solving skills is a life skill that everyone needs to know. A lot of adults need to know it too. So it's goal 4, social emotional needs, responsible decision making. So the person who wrote the SEL curriculum knew this was a problem. So we're going to give him a lot of leeway here, and we're going to say that by the end of the year he will have reduced what was in his backpack. This can take a long time to change this behavior, and any clinician could tell you that. Clinician, I mean people at school who are behavioral health people, adjustment counselors, nurses, or community providers. So we've made this very private, very special. It usually goes back to trauma of some kind, and we've asked that Alex have a private meeting with the adjustment counselor to discuss the items and why they are important to him. Remember, he's a little tiny guy, and then over the year that the number of things that are in his backpack that he's taking or exploring, I don't want to label it, is reduced. And it's being monitored. I think the adjustment counselor is probably the appropriate person for this because it is quite clinical. But if it happens in school, it's a school issue. And obviously it's having an impact on his social relationships. Kids that get their stuff taken by other kids are not happy kids, and they're probably, you know, could be bullied. You know, there's all kinds of outcomes of this. All right, so it is just about time, but we do have a few
more minutes. As I said, we have more goals. I will send them out. They don't have to help him from them, but you can kind of get a sense of them. I also will send out the references. Oh, and also a survey monkey will arrive in your email. And if you could just answer like 3 or 4 questions, that would be great for our records and our funding. So.
Okay, yes, so I wanted to group a few of these together.
Okay.
We had 4 or 5 questions about bullying and where objectives related to bullying would go, and then we had a parent say, how would I teach my 10-year-old son to be more assertive and savvy of social situations? If he is diagnosed with autism, how does this fit on his IEP behaviorally?
Okay. Well, it would definitely be a PLEP B.
Assertiveness training, that's a very interesting way to talk about anti-bullying.
I'm not sure if that's
that's
in
the
the
anti-bullying
curricula, but it may be because I'm not as familiar with it as I should be. But certainly that there is that, I think we talked about the social emotional curriculum where the kid is able to walk away, doesn't say that, but it's to say no, for example, and to conflict resolution, yes.
Right. So for the parent that asked the question and her son was on the autism spectrum, you might think that that would be communication,
Could be.
go under communication, and I would think social pragmatic. So that may mean that they want to teach whatever skill it is in the environment it occurs. A lot of times there's simulated things that happen that sometimes are not as successful as we teach them in the environment. Like on recess or in the gym or in the hall or wherever, but teaching those skills. And also I think about self-determination and self-advocacy. Those are great areas to include that kind of social pragmatics or maybe even assertive training.
Yep. I like the assertive training. Just so you know, there is a lot of stuff out there and in the community everywhere about teaching kids on the spectrum these days.
Right.
So
it's not as easy to find for kids that have
trauma background.
Correct.
But take the lead from the kids on the spectrum because they both have a lot of this neurological stuff going on, and maybe are learning the same way.
Right.
They patterning or new neural connections.
Right.
We've had an attendee suggest a safety plan as well, which can be added into PLEP B. Is that?
I believe so.
The anti-bullying law has a lot of different places during the IEP process where it is addressed.
Right.
And I know it has to come up for discussion.
Right.
With the team.
But, you know, whether it's on PLEP B or wherever, a safety plan needs to be included in the IEP before the signature in order to really be implemented correctly.
Safety plans are big also for kids with aggressive and challenging behaviors. And just so everybody knows, the Child Behavioral Health Initiative has their own safety plans that they will put together for schools if they're called in for consults.
Awesome.
And then it's circulated also within the community by them, including crisis teams. So it's a great way to put out for everybody to know what the proper procedures are for kids that have these meltdowns.
Awesome.
Okay. Here's another question. My school district states that social emotional issues addressed by guidance counselors or the school psychologist are offered to all students and are therefore not IEP services because they're offered universally. How do you get any social emotional goals on an IEP for a child versus on a 504? I think that's 2 questions.
Okay, so if it's identified in the assessment or evaluation and it's an identified need, there you have to have a goal. You can't just say, oh, well, we give it to everybody, but if the student needs specially designed instruction or a different kind of accommodation or a learning criteria, then it is different and they have to offer it.
We've actually had 2 more parents chime in and say that's exactly what my school said.
Yeah, I know
it's
it's
a
a problem.
I've heard this so many times.
And it's because the PLEP B has not been appropriately used by a lot of schools. And certainly that's why I included those curriculum, because it specifically states in the frameworks that these are issues that have to be addressed by the school for the whole population. I mean, for the general population also, but certainly for kids.
So they can't just say it's a general ed thing when it's specifically a child thing identified in an eval. Then they can't just walk away and say it's not an identified need.
Right. And of course that goes to the proper assessments also, the evaluations, and what we suggest through the RTSC is that definitely have a neuropsychological evaluation. Because those are the people who will address the social emotional needs best.
Okay, we've had a few questions about extracurriculars and after-school programming. If social skills are a goal, how do you add after-school programming to an IEP? And also, I think it's related, what about collaborations with parents and enforcing this stuff at home? And how can we keep it outside the classroom?
Well, you can't really enforce anything outside the classroom, but certainly you can do consults with parents, and that's part A of the service grid.
Right.
And we used to do a lot of those when I was teaching. Of course, it was something new to the school, for the little kids especially, we would have parents come in and we would kind of train them on how to do some of the things that we were doing in school. It was great because it was it was collaborative, it was going on for the day.
So remember that if a child wants to participate in an extracurricular activity after school and it's within the school building, then the school has to provide access to it due to the funding from the federal dollars. So again, you have to have like extended day on Tuesdays when we have after school support for homework or something like that. And the other way to get it is through a goal, to make it included in the goal. So if the student is going to practice social skills or social pragmatics and then you'd say during after-school activities, and then provide extended school day. And that's how you would get it in your IEP supported. And then you're also telling the school district that you're going to need additional support after 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. And so they're prepared for that. And I think everybody has a good outcome.
Yes.
And the funding is there, you're right.
And especially it's been supported again by the new law that was written. So
I just a lot of this information I don't think has trickled down all the way
yet.
But it is out there. And the actual behavioral health framework addresses the schools being collaborative about transportation out of school events. Like going to the Y, special services and stuff after school. I just looked at it very briefly. As I say, it's a very long document, but it is being addressed. And as I say, the trickle-down effect is not really there yet.
Okay. If a child requires a nurse during after-school groups, tutoring, dances, this should be included in PLEP B, correct?
Correct. So you want to make sure there's a goal. So that's the easiest way to do it. And then in order for the student to be able to access and they need a nurse support, then absolutely the nurse is included and then should be, again, on the service delivery grid and make sure that you have extended day. So it would be after school.
Okay. We have a question from a parent. How do these issues apply to a child who has ADHD? The lack of or not satisfactory homework causes my child to have disciplinary consequences, and so how do I address this?
Well, just from a personal experience with that, my kids would have major meltdowns that would last for hours. when they had to do homework.
And
they had a difficult day anyway because of their social and emotional needs having come from traumatic backgrounds.
So what I did was
I just went to the school and I said, well, I would like everyone to know that I'm not supporting the kids to do their homework. So we want to put in their IEP some time for reviewing homework and getting what they need to get done because I can't bring that stress into my house at night. It's just overwhelming, and I know a lot of kids on the spectrum have the same issue.
Right, and that can be a goal.
It can be a goal, and they were very accommodating
for me.
Maybe because I was
kind of
threatening. So stressed out, but they did accommodate it, and it worked out pretty well.
Right, but it can also go along with the diagnosis of ADD and ADHD. So I think it's recognized by professionals that, you know, kids work really hard to hold together all day, and when they get home and they think, oh my gosh, I have to write a paper and it has to be 5 pages, oh my goodness, and they can't even get started, let alone finish. So I think that needs to be discussed at the IEP meeting, and so everyone's on board that, you know, maybe everybody else is doing a 5-page paper and they're going to do a 2-page paper, and that may be more realistic and yet still have the same criteria.
Okay, we have one more. Actually, I'm sorry, a quick one about homework. Where can we find some examples of homework goals? Thank you for your input here.
Well, again, there's, as I say, there's a lot of things for kids, goal writing for kids on the spectrum. But you can, they're useful for anybody who's having those issues. So I don't have the information in front of me, but we collected a lot of goal writing information when we were writing this, or what Julie was presenting.
So could we send it to them?
We can send it to them. Yep. Actually, I think the link you gave to me just a couple of days ago, Paige. So for specifically about this kind of thing.
So yeah, so we'll send that out also today.
And the final one, as a parent, I have never been given the opportunity to write goals. I'm given a proposed IEP to accept or reject. I find the social emotional goals written are rarely measurable, and they're only subjective from school personnel. How do I diplomatically get myself included in actually writing these goals?
Well, actually, the law says you have the right to be part of that meeting and part of the development of the IEP goals. So if you're not part of it, one way you might want to think about doing is by bringing your own and telling them this is how we know it will be measured, or this is how we know that they will meet that goal. So if you bring your own goal in for discussion, then it'll be included. When professionals develop a draft IEP, they're just trying to help. They're just trying to give, you know, this is where we're going to start. But you certainly don't have to agree with it, and you certainly can bring your own. And so I would encourage you to do that and be confident and get it in the IEP.
I think a lot of
parents need to find their voice. That's what the Federation is all about. We're also about collaboration because a lot of, as I said, the trickle-down theory is a good one, and I'm not sure it's totally in effect yet. So if you tell team, or bring in these curricula, or bring in these frameworks, say, can we talk about this?
Right.
I would love to have a goal for my son or daughter around the recess where he doesn't have friends.
Right.
Right. It makes me very sad to think about having friends. Engender the empathy of the team is always a great way to bring everybody to your side.
And I think professionals also want to hear that, hear it from their family. And so, you know, everybody's invested in the child and the child learning these skills because, you know, life is long.
Yes. Yep. And if you don't have friends when you're 5 years old, you're probably not going to have them when you're 50.
Right.
And that's so sad.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Great.
Thank
you.
Well, thank you, everyone. And I have to get to work putting all these references together and sending out the PowerPoint. So we will see you next month. Okay. Thanks a lot. Bye.